Hi guys, this is module 4 and a part of the module at the very end of it we're going to be talking about gender. In this module we're reading Bonnie Nardi's book about World of Minecraft, and there she addresses several important issues. One of them is aesthetic experience of gaming, another one is gender, and the third one is transnationalism. So this presentation will focus on gender. So I'd like to briefly give you an overview of what I will talk about. Gender and sex. I would like to provide some working definitions of those, the way we think about them in sociocultural anthropology. I will then briefly mention enculturation and what it is. I will give you some examples of symbolizing gender and some examples of gender continuum or gender spectrum. I will briefly mention the relationship between biology and anatomy and sociocultural construction. I will raise a question about universal social laws pertinent to gender and sex and power dynamics among genders. I will mention and define androcentrism and point out where we are right now in studies of gender in sociocultural anthropology. So in sociocultural anthropology, we think about sexual characteristics of a human being as biological, or we attribute it to biology. And gender roles we consider to be socially and culturally constructed. So we distinguish biological sexual characteristics and gender roles. Now, therefore, gender can be understood as social, cultural, and psychological constructs imposed on the biological differences of sex in different ways in different societies. When we say that something is socially constructed or culturally constructed, it doesn't mean that we do not recognize the importance of biology. Biology definitely sets up a perimeter, a set of capacities of a human being to develop, but does not determine how one is male or female or third gender variant or fourth gender variant or fifth gender variant. Nonetheless, on a regular basis, people conflate differences between sex and gender. Here's one example that comes from a Greek anthropologist, Jason Antrosiou. When after the 20th week ultrasound, many people ask, he says, what is the gender of the baby? And Antrosiou was always tempted to joke, the sex is female, but we haven't decided on gender yet. There you should note, however, that parents play an important but only auxiliary role in fashioning gender expectations. So if one is male or female, or what we think of male or female sexually, that does not mean that one's gender will correspond to one's sex. How one is feminine or how one is masculine or how one is both at the same time is a product of sociocultural environment and individuals' choices in that environment. So when we talk about gender, we should also think of it not just as a noun, what is feminine or what is masculine, but also as a verb, in the sense that our commitment to a particular gendered identity is enacted on a daily basis. We're doing gender work on a daily basis. We're talking in a particular way, we eat in particular foods, we're relating to people in a particular ways, and so on and so forth. So we have to keep in mind that gender is also performed. Not only gender is performed, gender is also learned. And when in sociocultural anthropology we say gender is learned, we don't mean that it is something that we learn in childhood and don't learn anymore. We keep on learning how to be a gendered individual all lifelong. So what do men do and what do women do, and how to be a man or how to be a woman or how to be any other gender variant is something that we learn through education, through mass media, in the family, and continue on learning on a daily basis throughout our life. I also want to note that gender is but one element of one's identity. Age might be another element, ethnicity might be another element, religion might be another element, and so on and so forth. So in other words, one not only, for instance, myself, I'm not only feminine or a female as I identify myself, but I'm also very much a mother, I'm very much a teacher, I'm very much a middle-aged individual, I'm very much Russian, and so on and so forth. So gender, therefore, is not only a noun, it is not only a verb, but it is also a process. We're learning and performing gender throughout our daily life on a regular basis. So in sociocultural anthropology, we call this process enculturation. So what is enculturation? Enculturation is learning how to be a human being, a social being in a particular society on a daily basis through learning and performance. So in every society, human beings symbolize gender differences. There are multiple models of how to be a woman or how to be a man or how to be any other gender variant in a particular society and in a particular community. And these models are both ideological or ideational and physical or behavioral. And this ideology and physical behavior are obviously mutually informative in a sense that practice informs ideas and ideas often inform practice. Those are interconnected, mutually informative. So what would be ideological symbolization of gender differences? That would be the way we think about and conceive of the models of and for femininity and masculinity in a particular society, the way we think about gender ideology and its interrelations with race, class, and power, the way we think about sexuality, the way we think about how sexuality should be controlled. So all of those ideas would be what I call ideological symbolization or symbolizing gender differences, whereas physical or behavioral, through behavior, we act as we think we should as a gendered individual, but also gender can be physically inscribed into a human physical body. An example would be a circumcision. In other words, this physical act that is performed on the body marks one as a social male or social female or any other gender variant. So let me give you some examples. Foot binding in China would be an example of inscription of gender onto a physical body. So at a particular point of time in history, it was considered to be beautiful for a female to have a small feet, and that obviously required this kind of ideological commitment, required physical acts, some people call it mutilation, performed on a human body. So our ideological commitment to particular notions of beauty in Victorian England, for instance, is too an example of where ideology informs practice and the other way around. Look at this narrow waistline, the beauty, which required in some cases, in fact, removal of ribs. But, you know, beauty requires sacrifices, they say. Sura and Mursi people in Ethiopia consider it to be beautiful for a female to have a lip plate. Again, yet another example of how ideological commitments to certain notions of female beauty are inscribed onto a physical body. Of course, we don't need to go far. We can just look at the existing notions of beauty in our own society and what it requires. For instance, here you have the tattooed eyebrows and eyeliners and full lip procedures that some women choose to undergo to physically symbolize their gender differences. So the biology matters, obviously, as it sets up capacity, but the way this capacity develops is obviously a product, or so at least for us it is obvious in sociocultural anthropology that it is a product of sociocultural construction. And so what we've observed through research that we've conducted in different societies is that societies and individuals fabricate gender and sex in different meaningful ways. And this fabrication transcends sex-gender dichotomy and the kind of simplistic understanding of sex as biological and gender as social. And by this I mean is that if neither there are only two genders, nor there are only two sexes, and that can be exemplified by presence, for instance, of intersexed individuals, which last year, I believe, in Germany were recognized even on the statistics poll as a third gender variant.
It's 12 o'clock.
In fact, so much so that Thomas Laqueur in 1999 argued that the idea of two sexes and two genders is actually very recent in Western cultures. In other words, that the multiple fabrications and different fabrications of gender and sex in different meaningful ways are not limited to the societies and the elsewhere. They very much, or used to be very much, and still are, I believe, a part of our so-called Western cultures. So other cultures we've observed have notions of normal third or fourth or even fifth gender. They're not alternative genders, but very much a part of the local gender systems. And some examples are Hijras in India, who too, in fact, now recognized as officially recognized as a third gender variant in India. Another example would be transvesti in Brazil, Khanith in Oman, social male females who are socially males in the parts of Albania and Southeast Europe, women husbands among the Igbo of Nigeria, or Nandi of Kenya, and Bugis of Indonesia. And this is obviously, gender spectrum itself is a very interesting subject. Unfortunately, we're not exploring it in this class in as much detail as we should. But I call on you to perhaps spend some time looking up those gender variants that constitute a gender spectrum in the societies in India, Brazil, Oman, Europe, parts of Europe, Nigeria, or Indonesia. Gender differences also are important when we consider to be power dynamics in a society in question. Anthropologists observed that in human communities and societies, gender very much informs status, which results in a gender hierarchy. Whether you are considered to be feminine or masculine, or referred to as a male or female, would affect the way you are treated in a particular society. And it is always often assumed that in patriarchy, the domination, the rule, and the decision-making in the hands of males, which is in fact a very simplistic understanding of patriarchy, is something that is prevalent in human societies. But what we've observed through empirical empirical evidences, that there is a variation, that there is no homogeneity of gendered experiences when we talk about the relations between gender and power. So, in other words, that whether you are a male or female does not necessarily and absolutely related to the status that you hold in a particular society. So if there is no homogeneity of gender experience, then can we even make a claim that all males dominate all all females, at all times? So in sociocultural anthropology, research in gender leads us to question those conclusions, such as whether male domination is universal or not. Now, I want to go back to the relationship between anatomy or physiology and social behavior. Sociocultural anthropology prides itself on finding evidences and arguing against biological determinism. In other words, arguing that one's biological capacities do not determine unilaterally and absolutely one's ability to be or to become feminine or masculine. we've observed that there is a great variation, and in some cases it led us as far as arguing that biology doesn't matter at all, or so we were perceived as such discipline by other disciplines. However, we very much recognize the importance of biology in sociocultural anthropology, and yet, however, we still insist that we should not rely upon biological determinism explaining human behavior. Hence, a small conclusion here is that biological differences between men and women have no uniform and universal implications for social roles and relations. As I mentioned, one's status is not determined necessarily unilaterally and absolutely by one's physical capacities and characteristics. Biology takes on meaning as it is interpreted in a human culture and society, and sets up parameters for a broad range of human behaviors and one's social horizons and opportunities. Biology indeed is very important because biological variation sustains biological diversity. Now, emphasizing the importance of biology, we have observed, working closely with biologists, that all human embryos start out the same, with the female being the default. In fact, what we consider to be male genitals or secondary sexual characteristics appear at about 6 weeks of gestation of a human embryo. Because that happens because of the androgen hormones that are necessary for development of male genitalia in the developing fetus and the development of male secondary sexual characteristics. So with androgen hormones, the kind of default female embryo acquires secondary characteristics that we consider to be male genitalia. So when I say that sociocultural anthropology leads us to question kind of a simplistic understandings of social dynamics in different societies, and can we even make kind of universal claims that are applicable to every society at any point of time of human history? So we question, but it doesn't mean that we does not struggle with trying to understand gender dynamics and power dynamics in a society, both contemporary and historically. So this question, are women subordinated to men, has been on the mind of many theories, not only sociocultural anthropologists, but some sociocultural anthropologists argue that yes, indeed, there is a universal subordination of women to men because of different symbolic value that is attributed to men and women, and different symbolic associations. For instance, men are often associated with the public space, where women are often associated with private or domestic space, and men are often associated with culture, where women are associated with nature, some theorists argue. And therefore, this symbolic association informs a male domination, men's domination of men over women, or women's subordination to men. Now, other theories would say that there are ecological reasons for subordination of women to men. They have observed that women's power decreases in the sedentary societies where people are no longer nomadic, because women now stay at home longer. They are the men go out in public, women stay in private space, and therefore they have less chance to create social relations that would contribute to their social status. In fact, we also observe that in industrial societies, women have less power than in agricultural societies, because now, in addition to the job of taking care of the children and the house and the husband, now women have to work for a wage. But there is obviously no agreement in sociocultural anthropology whether those are sufficient explanations, and whether these explanations or theories are equally applicable to all societies at all times. So while some theories offer or explain gendered social relations as dominance. Other theorists explain it as a difference. So indeed, if the dominance of men over women is universal, then variation is not accounted for. We know empirically that not all women at all times are subordinated to men. So therefore, can we make a claim such as that? But if variation is accounted for, then domination is not universal. Therefore, in sociocultural anthropology, some scholars choose either explanation, either or, while other scholars consider both difference and dominance. Now, what is androcentrism? And this is an important term because in sociocultural anthropology, theory and theories about gender relations in a human society have been for a very long time informed by androcentric bias. Now, androcentrism is obviously an ideology that assumes that gender and sex are one and the same. In other words, this ideology assumes that secondary biological characteristics determine one's gendered identity, which in fact determines one's social status in the society. And as an outcome of this ideology is the perception that women are marginal in societies, and therefore they become marginal to some studies. Some ethnographies suffered from the androcentric bias, where by focusing on men only and on public place only, we do not get as much information about women located in private space, and obviously do not have a complete picture and understanding of gender dynamic in a society in question. Now, in and of by itself, it may not be problematic, and it could just be criticized as a lack of research, but studies such as that lead to misogyny on a larger level, patriarchy, and a view that change is impossible if indeed who we are is determined biologically. So women's studies programs were one response to such ideology in social sciences and humanities, and feminist anthropology was another one. Now, feminist anthropology often focused on women at the expense of men, which on one hand was a blessing, in a sense that we got a fuller picture of social dynamics in the society, but on the other hand it was a curse because we forgot that gender identities are in dialectical relationship to each other in any human society. Now, in as much as there is a variation in feminine experience, there is a variation in masculine experience too. In other words, men are not only warriors, they are also loving fathers. So the studies of masculinities is a new direction in feminist anthropology and women and gender studies programs. We realize that if we do not attend to masculinity, then men have very little need to change anything. And therefore, in an effort to de-essentialize gender, we have launched the studies of masculinities that led us to empirical evidences that there is no single distinctive form of masculinity or femininity across time and space, which obviously inform the way we theorize gender dynamic in a society in question. So what we've discovered is that there is a great diversity of masculinities, or what it means to be a man in any society, in a society in question. So what we're focusing right now on is the studies of the relations between different kinds of masculinities, which ones of them are dominant and which ones of them are subordinate, since there is a gender politics within masculinity as well. Men too perform gender in different ways and spaces, and they do that too on a regular basis in daily life in as much as women do, and any other gender variant. And so it's important to realize and recognize that there is a dialectic between genders, that they're mutually informative, that gender identities are never complete without the other. So there is this ongoing dialectic. So to conclude, if masculinities and femininities, if we perceive them as fixed, biological, and natural, then there is no change possible. But if we perceive them to be dynamic, performed, and constructed, that change is always possible. In fact, it's inevitable. So the trick is how to hold biological capacities in a high regard and at the same time understand the importance of sociocultural construction of gender and gendered identities. And this is where we are right now in the studies of gender in sociocultural anthropology. Thank you.